This time in Goss's Garage, we're joined by Rick Robinson of American High Performance in Lorton, Virginia. Rick, glad to see you back.
Great to be back.
All right, now, the big thing with production cars these days, smaller engines, forced induction by means of turbocharging. Now, we can turbocharge just about anything. What are some of the things that people should look out for before they sign on the dotted line?
Well, first of all, is know what you want to do with the car and why you're thinking about putting a supercharger or a turbocharger. Turbocharger is just another variation on superchargers, right? Why you want to put it on there, how you're going to use it, so that we can pick the right application for you. Certainly, turbochargers are the popular theme today. You see them a lot in the industry and vehicles that are coming out off the production line today to get more power out of smaller engines in order to be able to continue to get the performance out of the car while getting better gas mileage when I'm not using that extra power. But they come in a lot of different varieties. What we have on the table here is one of the typical small superchargers. This is something that you would buy for your basic 2-liter engine. It's sized appropriately for the amount of exhaust that particular car engine will produce and for the amount of boost that you're going to need to get power out of that motor.
All right, now, the one thing that strikes me about retrofitting seems to me that in most cases, a supercharger is a much more straightforward and actually easier conversion than a lot of these turbo kits.
They are, in that most of them are bolt-on kits. I mean, they bolt directly onto the motor. The root style superchargers sit right on top of the motor. The centrifugal style will bolt onto a bracket on the front of the motor driven by the accessory drive of the motor. But you have to have a kit that's designed for your specific car,
right,
and that specific engine. The turbos are a little more flexible in that regard, but they take a lot more work and fabrication by the shop or the person that's installing them in order to set it up. And one of the key things is this pipe right here. Now what you see here is just the stub, of course, that's coming out of the turbo. And why do we call it a turbo? Because that's a turbine engine right there. That's what's driving the supercharger instead of the belt on the basic supercharger. And it's driven by exhaust gas coming out of your motor. The piping that's necessary to get that exhaust gas to this turbine is the complex part of it, along with the pipe that's necessary to get the compressed air out of that outlet through an intercooler up in front of the car, because remember, every time we compress air, we heat the air, we have to cool it back down before we put it in the engine. So it's going to run through an intercooler up front and then back up and into the intake. That's a lot of pieces to...
a lot of plumbing.
A lot of plumbing to fabricate to make this thing work right.
Yeah, because in the end, you also have to get it connected to the exhaust system so that the outgoing gases can still go out the exhaust. And
absolutely. We were talking about this part, that's just to get it in there. Like you said, it's got to come out too. So it's exhausting through here, and now it's back out into your exhaust system. But there's also this thing called a wastegate. And a wastegate is basically a control valve for the turbine. You got to control the speed of these things. They wind up to phenomenal speeds, some of them over 150,000 RPM.
And along with that
RPM.
Phenomenal speed is phenomenal boost.
Right, right. The faster you spin them, the more boost they produce. And that's one of the neat things about turbos. An engine-driven supercharger is limited by how fast you can turn the engine. At 6,000 RPM, you're done. That's as far as you're going to go. And that's as much boost as you're going to get out of it. This thing, the faster you spin it, the more it produces, up to the physical limits of the turbine itself, of course. This is what controls that. It's how much exhaust I put into that turbine controls how fast it goes and then how much boost it creates. When I open the valve, I bleed that exhaust off, and I limit how much fast the turbine can spin. So that's what a wastegate does. And then I have to plumb that back and into the exhaust as well. So there's a lot of plumbing that goes along with it, like you said.
Yeah, it just strikes me that, especially if you're into do-it-yourself, that the supercharger is a lot more straightforward. It's bolt-on and the pieces are in the kit. We've installed a number of them here in the shop, and for the most part, your better supercharger kits, everything is there. It's just...
It is. It's all there and ready to go. And all of this pipe, of course, is stainless steel pipe. It all has to be welded together. So if you're not a good welder, and a TIG welder particularly, capable of welding stainless steel pipe, you're not going to have the ability to be able to fabricate one of these.
Okay. So that's one of the considerations, is to first figure out if you have the skills and the equipment and everything necessary. If you're thinking about doing this yourself, you see TV shows and so on, they make it look so simple, and it couldn't be farther from the truth.
And I can do it in an hour, right?
Oh yeah, right.
You didn't see all the cuts in between when they were trying to figure it out. You're correct. Now, there are bolt-on turbo kits. Companies like Helion, which is one of the best out there, that do produce bolt-on kits for specific cars.
Right.
But again, if there's not one available for your car, then you're stuck with one of these fabrication kits, which takes a lot of skill to be able to do.
Yeah, because fabrication, again, back to the TV shows, all kinds of fabrication seems to be, there's no mystery to it, and yet, if you've ever sat down and tried to make a template for cutting a piece of metal and making that template so it's going to line up with the bolt holes and so on that you're working with to make a bracket and so on, that's not as easy as it looks.
It's not. Certainly it takes some practice, and you're much better off going to a shop that's experienced at it and has the skills to be able to do it.
Now, turbocharging or supercharging, either one, that's just the beginning of the equation, because once you do this, then you have to work with the computer on the car so that it can work with your turbo or supercharger.
Correct. Remember, this is just an air pump. This is all about getting more air into the motor. Now I've got to put more fuel into the motor in order to be able to get the power out of it. I need the air in order to mix with the fuel, but it's the fuel that's giving me the power. So I've got injectors to think about. Are the injectors big enough to be able to produce the kind of power that I need? Is the rest of the fuel system, the fuel pump, the fuel lines, are they the right size to be able to feed the motor the amount of fuel that it needs? The computer has to be reprogrammed for the amount of air that's coming into it now, because it's mapping the airflow into the engine to understand how much fuel it needs to put in there. All of those things have to be taken into consideration. That whole computer has to be reprogrammed to be able to work with this.
Okay, now when we go to the computer, what are we going to do there? Are we going to replace the computer, or are we just going to reprogram it?
We're going to reprogram it. Most all of the cars, modern cars today, with the OBD2 system, as it was called, we reprogram the computer itself. In the old days, we used to chip it. You always used to hear about people chipping their car. Well, it was actually a little computer chip that you plugged into the computer that overrode it. But now, we just reprogram the computer itself. So you'll have a little handheld device that's used to load that in there. And again, we're changing all of those parameters in there that control how much fuel the computer tells the injectors to put into the motor at any given point.
Now, one other thing that people often overlook, we're putting more air into the engine. And in order to take advantage of that, we have to have an exhaust system that is capable of getting that extra volume out of the engine.
Absolutely. And it's even more important with turbine setups, because if I've got back pressure in this outlet from the turbo, that turbo is not going to spin as fast, and it's not going to give me the kind of boost that I'm looking for. So it's critical that the exhaust system be designed properly as well. Don't want too much back pressure, don't want too little back pressure either, because I want to maintain that velocity in the exhaust. They actually did an experiment with the F-150 EcoBoost. They had an aftermarket exhaust on it, which picked up about 15 horsepower over the stock exhaust, and then said, well, let's just take the exhaust off altogether and just dump it straight out of this downpipe. It was 15 horsepower less than it was before because it was just losing all of that velocity that it uses to scavenge the exhaust out of the motor.
Yeah, we see that. I'm a big motorcycle fan. You put straight pipes on a motorcycle and the performance goes right down the tubes, yet you put restrictors in the pipes and so on, performance goes up. So there's more to it than just throwing a big honking piece of tubing onto the exhaust, because that just isn't going to do it.
Yep.
So, okay, well, a lot to it. And again, in my opinion, it would be highly worthwhile to seek professional advice on this. And what you're going to get on the internet, who knows?
That's right. There's a lot of armchair mechanics out there that have never done it before. And experience counts in everything in life, and particularly in something as complicated as this.
Well, one thing that I have found is that on the internet, there are more experts than there are experts.
Yeah, and some of the answers that you see come up on some of these forums are just amazing. You just sit there and laugh. Is that, God, did he really say that?
Hi, Rick. I want to thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. If somebody wants to talk to you and get in touch with you, how can they do it?
Well, they can find us on the web at AmericanHighPerformance.com, or look up our web store for components like this at AmericanHighPerformance.biz, or give us a call at 703-339-7412.
And if you have a question or comment, drop me a line right here at radio@goss-garage.com.